Recently, the Society for Vascular Surgery has decided to sponsor an audiovisual archive to feature the leaders and major contributors in vascular surgery. A committee chaired by Dr. Jimmy Yao was formed to undertake interviews of our most famous and distinguished colleagues. My name is Roger Gregory, and today I will be interviewing the legendary surgeon, Dr. J. Leonel Villavicencio.
Very good.
Thank you for agreeing to this interview.
Oh, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you.
You were born in Mexico City, is that right?
I was born in Mexico City, yes.
Do you mind saying the date that you were born, the year you were born?
I was born in August 8, 1926.
The eldest of how many children?
I was the eldest of 6 children.
Now, early on, your father died.
Correct, yes. You see, my father was in the military. He was a colonel. And as you know, in the military, we travel all over the place. So we traveled from Mexico City to the north, which really I grew up in Sonora. And Sonora is at the border with Arizona. Was in Mexicali and Baja California, 3 years. Then we moved to Hermosillo, which is the capital of the state of Sonora. And there my father and I had a very close relationship. I was the eldest. I was probably about 9 years, 8 years. And being in the military, he showed me how to shoot. And he trusted me, he taught me, he educated me how to handle weapons. And we went out 3 days at a time to the mountains to hunt for deer or whatever little animal will be in our ways. I remember, very interesting, I was driving with my father in the mountains when we saw one of those big hairs sticking out. And he said, my father, shoot at him. And I had a .38 caliber. I was very young little fellow. And I shot at him 3 times, and I missed every time. And the hare just kept looking at me, and she left, unharmed. So I'll tell you what kind of a shooting I got. But then that reveals the good relationship that I have with my father. And this has implications later on what happened in my life. That's what I mentioned this. My father then was transferred to another city in the central part of Mexico, in the state of Guanajuato, which is right in the center of the country. And in the city where we were, there was no high schools, and I had just finished the elementary school, the 6 years. So that year, one whole year I spent shooting pigeons at the towers of the church. We were living in a convent, because the regiment my father was stationed was in the convent. So I used to climb and go up to the towers and finished up every pigeon that was there, in 1 year. After that, we moved to another city in León, Guanajuato, which is a city that had a high school. And I tell you, I was a lousy student. Lousy student. I always liked to read magazines and cartoons and so forth. So my father became very ill. He was a heavy smoker. He smoked about 3 packs a day, 2 to 3 packs a day. And the military doctor came to our home. And I remember very clearly, he handled my mother a big syringe with a needle and said, boil it for 10 minutes. So she did. And right there, went to my father and stuck the needle on the side. And I had no idea at that time what it was, but he got some water, some fluid. So my father felt better from then on, but this stick became infected. That was the year of early 1940. My father became gravely ill, and remember they had to make an incision and evacuate pus from the lungs and leave it draining with a piece of gauze. And I remember clearly now as a doctor, that smelled and looked like Pseudomonas.
Mm.
So for that reason, they urged us to transfer my father to Mexico City, where a brand new Army hospital, 1,000-bed hospital, had just been opened. So we did. And we took a train, the whole family, and moved to Mexico City. And that was the 30th of July of 1940. And the 31st, my father had high fever and was really delirium, with delirium. He didn't know what he was saying, and once in a while would come into senses. And I remember he told me, I was with him, he said, if anybody insults your mother, crack his head with a brick. I remember that, those things that stay in your mind. At that time, I was already 14 years old. But that thing, my father died shortly after that, on the same day. So my mother was left widow with 6 children.
Wow.
I was the eldest. The youngest was 2 years old. And I tell you, those were hard days.
But somehow, you got to the National University of Mexico for college.
Yes, I went to the first high school, and I did extremely well in high school, first place, all the years of high school. I tell you that impact that the death of my father had on my life. It changed me completely from a lazy student to an individual who really dedicated and was dedicated to study all the time. So I finished my high school, then went to the University of Mexico, where I finished the college, and again with the highest grades. And we were very poor, I remember traveling to the university. I had to insert in the soles of my shoes cardboards every day because it had holes in it. We didn't have money. And 6 kids and a widow, my mother worked in the post office. So went to them. Then came the decision, what are you going to do after finishing college?
Right.
And then I wanted to be an engineer, an aeronautical engineer.
Okay.
I had done very well in mathematics and I loved the science. And there was no such a career in Mexico at the time. So the next option was biological sciences. And I took biological sciences. And I finished then college and say, I want to go on to medical school. But I didn't have money to go to medical school. So suddenly the opportunity opened up. And there it was, the Military Medical School of Mexico. A legendary school established in 1867. And then during the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, who introduced everything French into Mexico. The French were very powerful at that time in Mexico. Porfirio Diaz dictatorship finished in 1910 with a big revolution in Mexico, killed about 1 million people. And many of the dead people, and this is important, died on the field without medical attention. Not because of this seriousness of the wounds, but because of the lack of doctors who take care of them. So one of the doctors who was taking care of the victorious general was against Pancho Villa, the legendary individual from the north who invaded the United States and Texas. Well, that individual became president, and one of the requests from the doctor who had operated on his arm, because he lost his arm in one of the battles, was create a military medical school. And in 1917, the school was founded again as really the constitutional, and the doctors came from the best doctors from the university. So the school has been the best school in the country for many, many years. So I was privileged to go to that school, apply for it. The education is free. And that was my opportunity to become a doctor. So I became a military doctor. And I got high grades, cum laude.
Right.
And did my residency at the military hospital.
But why surgery?
And when we finished the medical school, you don't know what you're going to be. I had several options, but again, one event took place during my residency in surgery, and I had been observing different people. I did a rotation through all the disciplines, and one of the rotations was with a cardiovascular surgeon who had trained in New Orleans in the Charity Hospital in New Orleans with Dr. Oshner. And that professor of mine was doing heart surgery, and that fascinated me. I saw and I assisted him. I was with him with a young girl, a 60-year-old girl who had an atrial septal defect. And after I saw that he was shaky, and there was a little accident when he was dissecting the inferior vena cava to pass a clamp, and he bled a great deal. And he became very anxious. So he clamped it, sutured the hole, and canceled the operation. So the defect was not closed. So when I left the operating room, I said, goodness sakes, this must be another way to do this well, you know. And that really propelled my interest in becoming a vascular surgeon first. And from then on, finished the residency, and there was a struggle. The Army sent me for a service for 3 years, first to Cavalry Regiment, later on to an Air Force squadron.
Yeah. Did you have the option to leave the military then, or
No.
did you?
No.
Did
no,
not have that
no.
option.
You do have to serve the Army 9 years after graduation. Plus, if you do a residency, it compounds the number of years that you have to serve.
Once your commitment had been served, you became involved in extensive fellowship training. That's
Right.
truly remarkable.
Well, actually, I was during one of my assignments in the city of Leon, where I had finished my residency and surgery. I had the opportunity to take care of 3 bullfight injuries at the groin, which really sparked my interest in the bullfights. And that's another story, you know. And how to take care of the bullfight injuries, which was tremendous. I made a video, which I have, on how to deal with the bullfight injuries.
Love to see it.
So I applied while I still was in Leon, Guanajuato, for a fellowship, and the Army gave me a scholarship of $100 a month.
Okay.
At that time, was just enough to pay my basic expenses. You know. So I went to the University of Illinois here in Chicago, to St. Luke's Hospital with Dr. Gesa de Takats, a very famous at that time, and still is, individual who became president of the Society of Vascular Surgery here, and he actually was president of many societies. Very witty,
Yes.
very serious, good researcher, and with a great interest in all kinds of vascular diseases. So I learned a great deal with him, from him at that time. And I came to Chicago just by coincidence because Dr. Ditakas accepted me at that time. And I met a number of remarkable people here.
Really?
I was just the beginning of the real arterial surgery. Dr. Orman Julian had just described the incision, the mid-sternotomy, to expose the vessels at the root of the heart. And he had the approach of the endarterectomy of the supraaortic trunks. So Dr. Sam Dye, his associate, also was working in endarterectomy of the aortoiliac system. And I saw them, I watched them, I went with them in the operating room, and I saw the remarkable skills that they had and how wonderful it was, you know. And they were really nice to me. They took me to the animal laboratory to teach me the basic techniques in vascular surgery. And then Dr. Ditakas introduced me to research. And we did research in rats, studying the behavior of the mast cells under different forms of stress, And I was fascinated to see these little cells being injected with heparin and how they swell because they love the heparin. And then under stress, and the stress was in the form of injections of ACTH or nitrogen mustard, they explode. And I have very beautiful slides showing the ruptured granules of the mast cells stained with violet blue. And that really fascinated me. So I became a very dedicated researcher from that point on.
Now, how did you get to Harvard?
That's another thing. It followed, sadly, my end of my story here in Chicago. Then I finished my year in 1956. I came here 56 to Chicago to 57, was beginning 57. And Dr. Ditakas asked me, would you like to stay another year with us? He said, Dr. Ditakas, I really would like to go to Dr. DeBakey in Texas.
Yes.
At that time, Dr. DeBakey was really very famous, and I was very willing to go there. He said, well, I will write a letter for you to Dr. DeBakey, but let me tell you, there is an opportunity at Harvard right now with Dr. Richard Warren, who's a young surgeon. He was a 51, 52-year-old surgeon, and they have an opening for a fellowship. And I would suggest that you take a look at that. And not even that, I'll pay your trip so you can go and see. Well, I went to Boston, and I lodged in a hotel which is next to the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital. The town was quiet, and at night the church bells. It was so nice to me to hear those things. The next day, and the next 2 days more, I was grilled to death by different people. They asked me questions. They took me to see patients, and they asked me questions. And I finally finished my 3 days with an interview by the chairman of the Department of Surgery, Dr. Francis Moore,
yes,
a legendary man. And I sat down with him, and he looked at me and said, so you would like to come here? I said, I'm considering this. I said to him, I was frank and said, I apply to Dr. DeBakey. If you were offered the position, would you consider it? And based on the experience that I have had, I say, yes, I would consider it. Well, Dr. Richard Warren, a professor of Harvard, will take you to the airport, and you will hear from us. And I asked him, I dared to ask him, how much do you pay, sir? I said, well, we pay $300. I said, are you married? No, I am single. Or you could live like a king with $300 in Boston. Well, with that thing, and say, well, $300 here and $100 of the army, I have $400, I'll be a rich man. So Dr. Warren drove me to the airport. In the way, he said, we have decided to offer you the position formally. Will you take it? Will you accept it? And I said, yes, I will accept it. So I arrived to Chicago again, back in Chicago, and I told Dr. Ditakas, and give it what? I had a telegram from Dr. DeBakey accepting me as a fellow. And what a conflict it was for me. But Dr. Ditakas, very wise, said to me, you gave your word in Boston, and your word should be the most valuable thing that you ever give. So you got to watch to Boston, and you will not regret it. See, because in Houston, you'll be watching surgery from the 3rd row. There are a lot of people. And in Boston, you will have more opportunities. And that was absolutely true,
What did you do with Dr. Warren?
With Dr. Warren, it's a nice story. He got me right as a research fellow. And one of the roles as a research fellow then was doing research, which I was doing research with fibrinolysis.
Yes.
At that time, fibrinolysis was very hot topic. So we got a substance called actase. An actase injected produces a very high activity in the fibrinolytic system. And in addition, I was doing another research, doing angiograms in patients who had had bypasses to see how they were doing. Mm-hmm. And I became the fellow who did all the angiograms at the Peter Hospital for 2 years, you know. Mm. So, and not only that, also aortograms. You remember the technique of direct angiogram from the back?
TLA.
Direct, yeah. So I did all that. But the research was very fascinating. So I did that research with the fibrinolytic agents. At that time, I was very involved with the Dr. Murray, Joseph Murray, and Dr. Merrill, who had done the first kidney transplant in the world at the Peter Van Brigham in 1954. And they were also very interested in fibrinolytic agents. And Dr. Dwight Harkin, the heart surgeon who had did one of the first mitral stenosis in the world also with the finger, was also interested in the same field. So I was really working very hard, attending also the clinics at the Deaconess Hospital on diabetic foot. Every Saturday they had a program called Diabetic Foot. And Dr. Warren was particularly interested in amputations. You know. So attending the amputation clinic at the VA hospital in Boston, and the Boston VA, I learned amputations very, very well.
How did you get involved in developing this pump oxygenator?
Well, then, when I finished that period of peripheral vascular surgery, then I went briefly for 5 months to Mexico City. And I realized that I needed really to complete my training in heart surgery. I had been at full training in peripheral vascular, veins and arteries. The veins with Dr. Linton and Dr. Warren.
Right.
Linton at the Mass General. And Dr. Richard Warren also was very interested in the field. And he had published a number of papers. So I really became soaked with their enthusiasm for this. So that was veins, that was arteries, how about heart? So the army in Mexico sent me back for 2 more years with the same salary. So I spent 2 years doing cardiac surgery this time with Dr. Harkin at the Brigham and basically with Dr. Robert Gross at Children's Hospital.
Right.
Where I ended up meeting my wife, which was a nurse for Dr. Gross, you know. So it was a very interesting period because at that time, Dr. John Kinmonth, the British surgeon, who basically is the father of lymphangiography and the study of lymphatics in the world, came to Boston. And I met him, and I was working at that time in the vein damage of the lymphatics by the venous surgery. And he said to me, here, this little bag contains patent blue. You make a solution, put 1 gram of this and 100 cc's of distilled water and put them in sterilize. And this, you can visualize the lymphatics and do beautiful lymphangiograms. And boy, I tell you, that became really interesting to me. Open up the third field.
Yes.
Veins, arteries, lymphatics, and heart. Actually, 4 fields.
Yes. In 1962, after all of these years in the United States, you returned to Mexico. Why was that?
Well, I had a commitment with the Army. They had been paying me, they gave me permission, so I had a commitment to go back to work with them. And I went back, and I went to the Military Central Hospital, which was, as I said to you, a 1,000-bed hospital, and I was the only vascular surgeon in the hospital. So I had a lot of work, a tremendous amount of work. I was operating all kinds of cases. I established the first open heart surgery department in the hospital. Vein surgery, I was training residents, and I was trained arterial surgery. I was doing bypasses, in-situ bypasses at the time. So I did the first 6 cases of in-situ bypasses in the 60s, 66, 67, 68. And so it was a very busy stage of my life, you know. And that is very important because that took me away from my family. And this is something that I have prepared a talk that I called it What My Teachers Didn't Teach Me. And what my teachers didn't teach me entails 3 things. First of all, how to deal with your colleagues. They didn't teach you how to deal with your colleges when you get out of your training.
No.
They don't teach you how to deal with your patients, really, how to treat your patients well. Dedicate time to them, listen to them, and really be a good doctor by listening to your patients, something that nowadays is lost. And the third thing is the relationship with your family. We dedicate a lot of years, a lot of time to your patients. We are married to our profession, and we forget that we have another marriage at home. And don't abandon your wife. There's a high incidence of divorce among doctors because of that. So I saw that the first time. And my wife has been so patient with me, 49 years of marriage, and still firm. You know. I was lucky to marry a 13-year-old younger woman. You know, that keeps an old man alive.
You're not an old man. During this time, you became the chairman and professor of surgery at the Army Hospital and vice chairman at the Children's Hospital.
I was.
What did these things entail?
A lot of work. A lot of work. You know, doing open heart surgery at Children's Hospital, we did. That's interesting. I did at Children's Hospital. I was 20 years at Children's Hospital in Mexico City. And I had the opportunity to see all kinds of vascular pathology because I was trained for it in adults, but not in children, you know. So you learn a lot. I learned about congenital vascular malformations. I operated children, the first renal vascular hypertension case with the Takayasu disease in Mexico. Then we published 30-something cases later on. And I operated on the first coarctation of children's, the first 100 consecutive ASDs without mortality in Mexico. So we did a lot of work in that section. And at the Army Hospital, we established the first cardiovascular department as such in the Army, in the military.
And this led to you becoming president of SVS in Mexico. Is that right?
It's a Society of Angiology and Vascular Surgery. That's the title. Yeah, I became president of the society and became president of the American College of Surgeons chapters. We have 3 chapters in Mexico. And I supervised the activities of the 3 chapters for the period of you become president of the college chapters, and I was re-elected once. So it was a lot of activity. And then the college appointed me chairman of the Latin American Committee to study voluntary hospital accreditation in Latin America. So all the governors of different countries in Latin America and I would meet regularly to see how can we go about to establish voluntary hospital accreditation. A very difficult task, you know, indeed.
Now, in 1982, you decided to return to the United States.
Well, I didn't decide it. I'll tell you, you can imagine, I was with this, I had lots of work. Also, I had private practice, you know. My private practice was blooming. I had a lot of patients. And then I still was a professor at the military medical school, and I decided to invite Dr. Norman Rich. You know, life is guided by events that happen in your life, things that you don't think what the consequences are going to be. So I met Dr. Rich, Norman Rich. He came, I was still in uniform, and we had nice pictures, both of us in uniform in front of the school. And we became very good friends because he is from Arizona, as you know.
Yes.
And I grew up in Sonora, which are just next neighbors. So we feel the same way, the same kind of land. I feel like really I grew up in the north of Mexico. And he's such an open soul, a wonderful individual, that we became really good friends. He sent his daughter to us, to my wife and I, to learn Spanish. She's the eldest daughter, and she was about 17, 18 years old. So to register her at the university, she started taking classes, and then got her in the hospital to receive patients. So she had to practice Spanish, and she learned Spanish, and that has helped her a lot in her career as a lawyer. So Norman then invited my son to go and visit him, and it has been an exchanges. Then it came a crisis in the early 80s. The peso, the coin of Mexico, devaluated. And I had a son studying in Cornell, my eldest son. And I said, that son is the one who suffered more my absence from home. Was the first one, and I rarely saw him. Before I realized he has gone to Cornell, something I really regret. And Norman said, you have a son in Cornell, yeah? And with this problem with Mexico, the president decided that you cannot send money in dollars to the United States. They closed the borders for the sending money to any country outside. He said, why don't you consider coming to the United States? He said, it's not that Mexico is sinking, he says. Mexico is a great country, and it has gone through many maladventures, but it will help you, son, and you can help us. There is a new military medical school in Mexico. And at that time, I had served my country as a doctor, a military doctor, 30 years. As I was, when I retired, I was a colonel. So
you certainly met your obligations.
I did. And then I asked my wife, which I had married her in 1962, just shortly before coming back to Mexico. I married, and we in Williamstown, a beautiful town, I teased her, said, I married you because I always wanted to come back to Williamstown. It's such a beautiful place. And so I tell my wife, you like to come back to the United States? She said, no. Why? You know why? Wives in Mexico, especially if you can reach to a certain medium level economic position. We have maids. We had an ex-patient of mine that I had healed a leg ulcer. He was grateful, and he was working with me. He washed my car. He washed outside. And my wife had 2 maids. So who wants to come back to the United States to work, So finally I said, what about a sabbatical? Let's go for 2 years. I'm not going to tell Norman, because Norman was insistent, And then Christmas of '82 came, and I got a letter from the dean of the university, of the Uniform Service University, Dr. Sanford. He said, you have been appointed professor of surgery with tenure at the Uniform Service University. This is after a series of visits, And you have 40 days to accept or decline. Those were the most difficult 40 days of my life, Consider, in Mexico I had everything, patience, money at the time, which is important in your life. It's not the most important thing, but it's important to live.
Sure.
And leave everything, my office with my secretaries, my 2 associates. What am I going to say to the patients, Well, after all, my wife decided, okay, but go for 2 years. So I arranged everything. I left my office as it was because I really was thinking of going back to Mexico. It was a request for Dr. Rich. So we came to the United States for that reason, because Norman asked me to come. And when I came to Washington, I came at the same time that Charles Robb. And Harry Schumacher was there. And I tell you, those individuals with Norman Rich and they accepted me like one of their brothers, you know. No problems whatsoever. Merging with them and seeing residents. I opened up the very first clinic to study venous and lymphatic diseases in the military in 1984. And I had the clinic very busy. The Navy, Bethesda asked me to do the same, so I used to see in those clinics twice a week, having venous patients with malformations, with all kinds of diseases, vascular. Teaching students, residents, and vascular fellows became such a pleasant thing for me that I decided to stay. And my 2 years were transformed in 25 years. And I never regretted it.
Dr. V, I want to talk for a moment about some of your career highlights. Besides 3 books and some 350 total publications, which is astounding. You were the chairman of surgery at your Army hospital, the only Latin American honorary member of SVS. You received the Founders Award from the Venous Forum, the Rathschow Gold Medal from Germany for outstanding scientific achievements, including the fact that you learned to speak German.
Well, yeah, that was one of the reasons.
AOA, FACS. Very candidly, why you, with hundreds of bright, energetic young surgeons from Latin America, why did you rise to the top? How did that happen?
You know, as I told you, events are the ones who shape your life. You never know. I was very interested in languages. My college education was in French because, as I said, Mexico was under the French influence for many years. And they used to say that the children, when they're born, they come from France, from Paris. So Mexico was under a tremendous French influence. So my college education was French. I had to study French every day, 1 hour a day, for 2 or 3 years, you know. So I was very good in French. But then come to the military medical school, and at that time, English was becoming the scientific language of the world. And I had to learn English. And this applies to your question. So I went to study English at the Mexican North American Institute of Cultural Relations, where I learned really English, from pronunciation, phonetic, grammar, everything. That was an important factor and decided me to come to the States and to help me to be understood here.
Well, your English is perfect.
It was not when I arrived in Chicago. I landed up and the taxi drivers took me to the University of Illinois and I couldn't understand this guy, you know. He was a black fellow. So I said, my goodness, I thought I had studied English. But that gradually turned to be a minor. Then I learned German.
Yes. Looking back, what single thing in your mind made you a better surgeon?
My patience, I think. My patience, you know, to see bad results in your patients is a lesson, and they teach you a lot. And you say, how can I avoid this mistake? And that's what makes us also teachers, you know, because you want to teach the young people how to avoid the mistakes you made. And we made mistakes. I made mistakes, no question about it. I think all of us have made mistakes in our lives, surgical or non-surgical, but I'm talking about our profession. Yes, we always have made committed some errors. And every time you do that, you should go back and review the cases and find out why this happened and try to make this not to happen next time you do the same thing.
I've looked in your history and tried to define who would be your mentors, and the list was a full page of luminaries that you've been associated with. Who would you say were your primary mentors?
Well, I was lucky to have been at the time, when vascular surgery was being developed. And there were wonderful things that happened those years. In Chicago, Dr. Itakas, without any question,
Yes.
was my main mentor. Learning at his clinics every week, seeing the parade of patients with some weird diseases, with lupus, with scleroderma, something that other people don't see, And learning from this very wise man, kind man, it really was very influential. Later in the operating room, Dr. Sam Dye and Norman Julian and Javed, that was a wonderful time of my life in Chicago. In Boston, that's another story, In Boston, Richard Warren, the descendant of the founders of the Harvard Medical School and the Mass General Hospital. His name is Dr. Richard Warren, and he had 4 children, He invited me to live with him at home and his wife, Cora.
Wow.
After having been a year in Boston. They open their home to you, and really that to me is my family, my American family. I deeply appreciated that, and he was devoted to teaching me. So in the operating room with him, and with Dr. Eddie Edwards, with Dr. Franny Moore, and then in the Mass General with Dr. Richard Linton.
Yes.
Then at the Deaconess Hospital with the Jocelyn Clinic, learned all about diabetic foot. As I tell you, that was a fantastic life. Dr. Warren, no question about it, in Boston, was the prominent figure that impacted my studies in there. Let's say Dr. Robert Gross,
Yes.
with his fantastic life, second coarctation, because the
Right.
first one was Crawford. Then the first patent doctor's legation, without permission from his boss.
Right.
Then, I haven't met my wife, and he was in the intensive care unit with children. I think that impacted my whole life. 49 years married to that lady.
I would have to say.
That's important,
Absolutely.
And she has been patient. You must have a patient wife to survive in medicine.
I need to ask you some questions for your opinion. Now that American medicine has become a political football, do you think we're losing our way? You've had the advantage of seeing several other medical systems devoted to healthcare, South American, military medicine, civilian. Do you think we're losing our way?
Well, I think it is a worldwide crisis, because I was lucky, me and maybe Dick Dean also, and other ones who have been interviewed, that we lived an era in which things were different. There was no such a thing as the insurance companies on top of you, and there was many things that has happened since then. Also, we got to see nowadays the patients in a hurry. The patients complain that we don't devote to them enough time,
Right.
that we don't listen to them. And that has been, in my book, an important thing to gain the trust of your patient. Let them talk to you. It's important to let the patients talk to you. And if you are well trained, you have good armamentarium in your training, you can almost always come up with a very possible diagnosis that you document later on with the studies that are necessary. There are also another factor that we didn't have in Mexico, don't have yet as much as here, are the lawyers.
Right.
The lawyers are devils in this country, you know. And this is okay if you say that in public. And those are the responsible for the expenses that have to be incurred to prevent being sued, you know. And in Mexico, we didn't have that at that time, you know. So there are some factors in here that I'm sure you all practice in this country have recognized, that you have to do many things that you probably wouldn't have to do unless you wouldn't be exposed to the lawyers if something wrong happened.
As you know, several years ago, there was a huge push by many in vascular surgery but to become independent of the American Board of Surgery. Yet this effort failed. Why do you think that failed?
Well, there are many interests in people. Politics are politics. And, you know, I better don't dig into that field of why did it fail. Because I know a lot of the people who were involved in it. I know Pat Claggett, I know Frank Beath, I know everybody. So it really is a problem that I wouldn't like to go into it.
Dr. V, tell us from your perspective what you think of international exchange in vascular surgery. It seems that this is on the decline now. Do you think this is because of the merger between SVS and ISCVS, the North American chapter?
Well, I don't think so. That depends on a lot of people and the interest that they have in international exchanges. You know. Like when I came to USUS at the University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, Dr. Rich and I decided to really stimulate international exchanges. And we started a program called the Visiting Scholars, students, you know, these are students, and also established two prizes, two awards. One is called the Amistad Award that Norm and I established to help the American students go to see the Military Medical School of Mexico, which is their sister school. Both are military.
Yes.
Military in Mexico is an academy. You live in quarters, cannot get married, spend 6 years studying, and live in the school. It's a tough school, you know. And the University of the Health Sciences in Bethesda, which is a strictly military school, which is, you know, we graduate Army, Navy, and Air Force students and public health. So in Mexico, our graduates are multi-potentials. They can go to the Army or to the Navy, or to the Air Force. Not to the Navy, Army or Air Force. The Navy was discriminated because they have their own little medical school. So for that reason, we established, Norman and I, an award. We put some money, and this was initially $10,000 to cover the expenses of two best students from the United States, American students, to go and spend a month in the hospital in Mexico and the Military Medical School of Mexico, see how the students live, see the diseases that we have in our country. And two of the Mexican students who are in the last year of their career, best students, academic, top of the academic ladder, who speak the language. They have to speak English, the ones going to the United States, as well as speak Spanish, the ones going to Mexico. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. And we have accomplished this, and we are now in the 13th year of this exchange. Wow. And they have established long-lasting friendships among the students who are now graduates. It's been a wonderful experience. The other award that we had, you know, is with the Philippines. There is an award. One of our professors is married to a nice Filipino lady, and there is an award towards students who want to go to the Philippines, to go to the General Hospital in Manila, and that's a very popular award. And finally, I had under my care about 50 students from different countries who come and spend from 6 months to a year doing research with me, and always place them as the first authors of any paper that we published. The majority have been German.
Really?
Well, basically, as I said to you, I learned the language, and I have visited the country. I spent a sabbatical in Germany for 3 months, as many sabbatical, visiting 5 French universities. I saw my German colleagues operate carotids and operate aneurysm beautifully, So there was an educational tour. I went by myself. My wife stayed home with the kids, and I dedicated entirely to observe and study the good things and the bad things that I observed. At that time, I was fully trained, so I could really see, for example, Dr. Vollmer, a very famous vascular surgeon.
Yes.
He gave me, by the way, his endarterectomy wires, and I gave them to Walter Reed when I came. So it's and I was surprised that now they are selling them again, and they're getting popular again. The endarterectomy and catheters of Vollmer. So I met many people. I was doing cardiac surgery at the time, so I went to Munich, to the Heart Institute in Munich. And I tell you, the friends that I made then, without the influence of any beers, have become very good friends of mine. Very good friends still. I was in the home of Professor Eberhard Struck, who was the surgeon who did the first heart transplant in Germany, and we are friends forever. Good people. So I learned the language. I tell you why that was a challenge, but I studied 5 years of German. Then I went 3 months to Germany, so I was fluent. And so I have kept it to a certain extent. If you don't practice, you lose it.
Looking back, of all the operations you've done, what was your favorite operation?
Endarterectomy. A well-done endarterectomy at that time. It was a wonderful. Still, it's an option in certain cases. The carotid endarterectomy is still going on. It's a clean procedure. The aortoiliac endarterectomy that I saw here in Chicago with Dr. Sam Dye, beautifully clean, and then put in sometimes a patch with a plastic patch on top. That was good. And it's a valuable resource. I always was attracted to endarterectomy. So the venous surgery became later on in my life an important thing, and it's all the aspects of venous surgery really are very important. And when I established the clinic at Walter Reed in 1984, they realized my vascular fellows and my residents, how important for them was to learn really well how to take care of venous disorders, how to wrap a leg, how to care for an ulcer, how to do a good vein mapping. Nowadays, with the new laser and radiofrequency procedures, that has gone to one side, but there are some patients who still benefit with a good surgical procedure.
Certainly. What are your thoughts on endovascular surgery?
I think endovascular surgery has been a very good procedure for a good number of patients that either really sick or they receive the benefit. Look at the aortic aneurysm. And it seems to be that the aortic aneurysm are now a thing selected for certain type of people, but most of them are endovascular. I still think that we have to wait much more time, to see what is the long-term fate of the endovascular. But I think it's been a very good thing to have. And like yesterday in one of the sessions here, Dr. Darling was talking about he still does the bypasses instead of doing endovascular procedures. And he prefers in many cases to do a good bypass than an endovascular procedure. So still time is a witness, a judge that you cannot buy, and will tell you what the final verdict is.
What is your advice to young surgeons?
My advice is get well trained. Get the best training that you can get. Once you get a good training in a good center, you can face anything in your career. You know. And of course, you will have some errors, but errors make experience. Experience is nothing but a series of errors.
Dr. Villavicencio, I can see why you're called the Mexican maestro. Thank you for agreeing to this
Thank you very
interview.
much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.